Hello, podcast fam. I am thrilled to share some exciting news. My book, Sow, Grow, Lead, is officially live on Amazon. This book is more than just my story of starting a nonprofit and building a peanut butter factory in Malawi. Though trust me, the ups and downs of that journey are worth the read. It's also packed with practical strategies to help nonprofit leaders like you tackle challenges with clarity, courage, and a whole lot of heart. If you've ever wondered how to turn your vision into reality, navigate the inevitable hurdles, and build something meaningful, whether in your organization or in your own life, this book is for you. I'd be so grateful for your support in spreading the word. Grab your copy of Sow, Grow, Lead in the show notes and on Amazon today. Let's keep sowing seeds of impact together. Welcome to the Lead with Heart podcast, which is dedicated to nonprofit leaders who are passionate about making a difference. I'm your host, Haley Cooper, and I'm thrilled to have you join us on a journey of growth, inspiration, and transformation. At Lead with Heart, we believe that leading with heart means embracing empathy, compassion, and authenticity in every aspect of our work. It's about putting people first, fostering genuine connections, and creating a positive impact that goes beyond numbers and metrics. In the nonprofit world, it can often feel like we're carrying the weight of the world on our shoulders. The challenges are immense, and the road can be lonely. But here, you're not alone. This podcast is a community where we support each other, share our stories, and learn together. Each episode will dive into personal and professional development topics tailored specifically for nonprofit leaders. From innovative fundraising strategies and effective team management to self-care practices and leadership insights, we're here to provide you with practical strategies that you can apply to your life and work. My goal is to empower you, elevate your leadership, and engage your heart in all that you do. I want to help you navigate the unique challenges of the nonprofit sector with confidence and resilience, so you can continue to create meaningful change in the world. So whether you're driving to a meeting, taking a break, or winding down for the day, tune in and join us on this journey. Together, we'll discover what it truly means to lead with heart. Thank you for being here. Let's dive in. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Lead with Heart podcast. This is your host, Haley Cooper, and I am very excited to have Lisa Greer on the podcast today. She is someone that I have admired throughout my fundraising career, so this is an awesome moment for me to get to be able to talk to her about all things philanthropy and fundraising and leadership today. Lisa is a successful businesswoman who experienced a financial windfall and set out to make 6- and 7-figure charitable donations. Shocked by the inefficiency and dysfunction she encountered within many nonprofits, Lisa discovered that outdated fundraising strategies were leaving billions of dollars on the table and threatening the sector's viability. Committed to reinvigorating the nonprofit world, she has become a major donor dedicated to providing specific and actionable recommendations. She is the author of the best-selling book, Philanthropy Revolution, and the Essential Fundraising Handbook, which we will link in the show notes, where she serves as a truth-telling advisor advocating for change. Well, Lisa, I am so excited to have you here. Welcome.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here, Haley.
So for our listeners and just me in general, tell me a little bit more about your background. Is there a specific moment in your life or growing up where you realized philanthropy was part of your way of being? And then what led you to get really curious about this field?
So thank you for asking that. Most of the time growing up, we were not a philanthropic family. We just didn't use the word philanthropy in the house because we were a very middle class family, and we were giving to things like PTA, Girl Scouts, that kind of stuff, mostly more local. And my mom was very involved in the school and all that kind of stuff. But philanthropists were this other type of person that had people at trust funds and drove fancy cars, and we didn't know about that. So I really wasn't involved in it. And then over time, I think it might have started when I was in a sorority, actually, in college. And most sororities and fraternities have a charity that they raise money for. So got a little bit involved in that, not a lot. And then over time, learned about more. And then when we had this financial windfall, as you called it, we just said, well, there's this whole bunch of money coming. Of course, we have to figure out who we're going to give it to. And I didn't know till about 6 months or a year later that everybody didn't have that same reaction. I thought that everybody who had money, of course they would say that. Like, why would they not say that? So we just went on our own. I didn't know a lot of other wealthy people. And so we just tried to figure it out. And there really isn't a handbook for how to give. So I just guessed, and I didn't know that a development person meant that was a fundraiser. I thought, why don't they just call themselves a fundraiser if they are advancement? What does that mean? So tried to learn. But our big issue, or the big thing that happened, is we tried to give two initial gifts. One of them of $2 million. The other one, it was $1 million. And one of them took 7 months to get the institution to accept the money from us because they didn't believe we had the money because we weren't already on their lists as being a previous donor. And the crazy thing about it is that the money was coming from a stock basically offering that did very well. And it was public information to see exactly how much we had in the company because my husband was the co-founder and how much money we would be able to sell, how much stock would be able to sell. But nobody even looked at that. And the stockbrokers around and the investment bankers and the real estate guys, they all looked starting at day one. But it was a good year and a half before any fundraisers figured out that we even existed. And by then we'd already given the big gifts and all of that. So it was very strange. We both come from business. And when we got that reaction that people didn't believe you have money, and then they didn't bother checking, and then they didn't want to talk to you when you said you want to give them money, we thought that was very strange. So that's where it all started.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing your story. And when we were off screen and off recording, we were talking a lot about how women and people of color often get ignored in the nonprofit sector. And I can only imagine, as a woman who's trying to give millions of dollars away, like being not necessarily ignored, but the process being questioned of, do you really have this money, can speak volumes. And I think overall, and even in your book, Philanthropy Revolution, you mentioned that the nonprofit industry often ignores people of color and specifically women. So can you elaborate on how this oversight affects the sector and the potential financial impact of this neglect?
Right. So I'll take the financial impact first. The sector is finally realizing that it's not just do the same thing over and over again and raise money. And we've now had 2 years and 8+ quarters where we've shown a decline in not only the number of donors, but the number of dollars raised, despite the Mackenzie Scotts of the world. And it's a pretty shocking thing. But for a while, people were saying, oh, that's just cyclical, it's whatever. And it's not. This was bound to happen because you can't ignore huge swaths of people and then wonder why you're not raising as much money. I've had fundraisers say to me, long-term professional fundraisers say, well, it's just too hard to change the way we do things. We just want to do it the same way we've always done. We'll go to the same, there's not a better way of saying it than old white men, but we're going to go to those same 10, 20, 30 guys that we've been working with forever and just ask them for more money. Because as hard as that may be, it's easier than learning how to deal with people that we're not used to. And so that's just a bad decision every way you look at it. I can't think of anything good about it other than, of course, you hear that the fundraisers are resource strapped and all that kind of thing. But that focus, there's ways of getting around that and ways of working within your resources. But to ignore an entire group of people, especially when women are responsible for at least 60% of all fundraising dollars given, even if you don't see their name on the check or the payment, whatever it is, they're still making those decisions. And women are controlling more and more of the wealth really in the whole world. So why, when I say more, I mean getting to be parity. So if that's the case, why are we continuing to ignore women? And I do think with what happened with me, if I was a woman, I think I would have gotten a different reaction. I'm sorry to say, but I think that if a man came in and did the exact same thing, they probably would have been taken more seriously. And that's just a cultural norm that we've got to get past.
Imagine a fundraising partner that not only helps you raise more money, but also supports you in retaining your donors. A partner that helps you raise funds both online and on location so you can grow your impact faster. That's DonorBox, a comprehensive suite of tools, services, and resources that give fundraisers just like you a custom solution to tackle your unique challenges, helping you achieve the growth and sustainability your organization needs, helping you help others. Visit donorbox.org to learn more. Yeah, I definitely agree. You talked a little bit about outdated fundraising strategies that you've encountered in the nonprofit sector. Can you elaborate a little bit more on what you have seen as these outdated fundraising strategies and how they continue to contribute to leaving billions of dollars on the table?
So lots of different ways that's done. It can be from the Mr. and Mrs. or how you're identifying, how you're writing to somebody. There was a really crazy, wonderful thing that happened at Dartmouth that your listeners can look up, where they raised $370 something million just from women because a particular woman donor, she wasn't even a donor, she was an alum, said, I am tired of people sending all the mail to my husband who didn't even go to this school. And I'm tired of them ignoring me. And I think 99% of people who went through that would have just said, well, I'm just not going to have anything to do with this school again. But she decided for whatever wonderful reason that she was going to show them that she could actually raise money and that women actually raise lots of money. And she did it. And it's a wonderful success story. But it really starts with even who you talk to. I know that if somebody was talking to me, I've had this happen dozens of times, and somebody says to me, and I do the financial work for our household and our family, and people know that that's the piece that I do. And we're very clear about that. But having said that, I have people who will still call my husband and say, oh, we really need to meet with you, and almost make it like a secret thing so that they didn't meet with me. And I really don't think I'm that scary, but they wouldn't even invite both of us. So, and knowing full well, like at one point, I was the head of an institution, a religious institution. I was the chairman of the board, and another institution in the same exact world, same area, et cetera, decided that they were going to go after my husband and try and get money from him and completely ignore that I was running this other one. And I thought, that's very strange. So it literally starts with the initial conversation. I think with women, they almost always ask, what does your husband say? Can you ask your husband? All that kind of thing. And with men, I don't think they say the reverse very often. I mean, you tell me if I'm wrong. I don't think they say, so we go home and discuss it with your wife. What do you think? They don't really do that. And we need to figure out a way to get past that because I think that's just such an archaic way of thinking.
Yeah, and I think that's just across the board. Like I always love when solicitors knock on my door and they go, do you own the house? I'm like,
wow.
Yes, I am on the title. Thank you. They're like, who is that? It's like the house owner home. I'm like, you're talking to her right here. Right. I think it's just like a cultural norm that like women have come into assets and are able to financially provide for the family and have that meaningful philanthropic contribution.
We've been making up half of the workforce for decades now, and it just hasn't caught up in this world. And I think that if the fundraising sector wants to continue to do well and become sustainable, I think they need to really not wait. I think they need to do that now, and they need to say, this is what's going to happen throughout our entire sector. We are going to realize and recognize that we need to treat women and men basically the same, at least in terms of money, that women control a lot of money in this world. And if we ignore them, they're just not going to give. And once we realize that, maybe things will change. But right now, we still seem to be doing, not everybody, but some organizations are still doing the kind of old tried and true thing of let's just ask the older men and let's pretend that, their sons and daughters are going to give the same amount of money that daddy gave, which I just don't believe is true at all. So it might be in some cases, but most of the time they want to go do their own thing and find their own way in the charitable community. So I don't know why we continue to do that. Here's that horrible example, the one that you just said, where they're like, is the man of the house here? That kind of thing. It's just crazy. So one day we're going to figure it out. And I think we're in a really great position, especially since there's more women in fundraising than there are men at the moment, that I think we're in a wonderful position to take a lead on that. Everything we do, we're going to really look at ourselves and say, are we treating men and women differently? That would be ideal.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And another aspect of your work, which we all know is important, is viewing donors as people rather than just sources of revenue. So can you share some key strategies that you have helped coach nonprofits to build those long-term, authentic, and mutually productive relationships with their donors?
So people don't like to be, I heard this really interesting, it's slightly off color, but not a lot, quote the other day. And somebody said, if you go to meet with somebody expecting a one-night stand, you'll have a one-night stand. And I thought that was great, because if you go in and you just want to get money right now, to then expect a relationship is a little strange. If you go in like that and you say, your entire conversation is all leading towards give me money, you shouldn't expect that a relationship is going to come from that. Those are two different things. And it is very hard from the donor perspective to realize that you've been through this sort of pushy, twisting your arm thing to give you money. and that they're then going to think you have a relationship, meaning the fundraiser will think that you have a relationship and keep coming back and ask you to give again. Because it doesn't feel very good when somebody's saying, basically, they make it pretty clear that I'm going to say whatever I need to say to get money from you. And that's why 80% of first-time fundraisers don't give a second year. I think it's largely because of that.
Yeah, and I even think about the stats of donor retention within nonprofits being less than 40%. So viewing it as that one-time donation is doing your mission a disservice because you're not able to steward the money well and steward the people that are giving the money. And you're working so hard for that 40% that what happens to that other 60% that could really drive your mission forward.
It's true. And the first-time donors who give a second year, it's 80% of them don't come back. It's the continuing donors where it starts to get up to 40% return, but you're just constantly on a treadmill as a fundraiser. And that's why fundraisers feel they're constantly on a treadmill, because they are trying to replenish that group of people. And the nice thing is that the kind of, the shining light there is we can change that. We know how. The way to do it is the way that you preach, is we need to have relationships. We need to have compassion and empathy. We need to actually get to know who that person is. We need to see the fundraiser and the donor as partners. And I know some fundraisers don't like that so much because they think, oh no, the donors are these stuffy people who are different and they act differently and they look differently. And really, they don't. There's just as many different types of fundraisers as there are different types of donors, as there are different types of teachers and different types of doctors. So let's just get past that and say, you know what, people are individuals and people crave relationships. And if we are, the thing that bothers me really the most overall is that if we are not having those relationships and we're doing this twist your arm, give me money thing, we're actually denying the donor of the ability to feel good about giving because they're going to feel crappy about it. And that's a disservice to the whole sector.
Yeah, I agree. And you mentioned something about compassion and empathy and how it's lacking in the nonprofit field. But when you think about it, you're like, that doesn't make sense because our sector is built on compassion and empathy, but something is lacking. So can you describe a little bit more about what compassion and empathy looks like when it comes specifically to fundraising?
So if you have a meeting with somebody, well, let's start with really listening. So you have a meeting with somebody and you're talking with them about your wonderful organization and what you do. You don't know what that person's been through. And if you start talking to the person like a human and say, gee, tell me a little bit about your family. Tell me a little, not just related to money. How are things going? And then you'll find out that, oh, they're taking care of their elderly parents, something like that. You have that discussion and you forget about, just don't ask them for the money then. And I know it's hard to go back to the office and say, I didn't come back with a quote check, but that's how you build a relationship, is really listening. And I think it's important. In fact, I know it's important to anybody who's giving, when all of us are donors at some point in our lives, to feel seen as a human and feel seen as somebody who has emotions and who has hopes and dreams and all those kinds of things. And so if you can get past the, I just want to get a check, I'm just here as long as it takes to get money piece, if you can get past that and you really say, look, and first of all, I don't think fundraisers should be fundraisers if they don't like people. So hopefully they like people, they're passionate about their cause and they want to share their passion about the cause with this person. And so that's really what it has to be. And that is the beginning of a relationship. And those are the kinds of relationships that last a really long time. But you have to first look at the person as a human and realize that they are all different. And if somebody has like I said, they're taking care of their elderly parents, you don't want to go back to them and say a week later, oh, had a great meeting with you. We now have this thing going on. We want you to send us money, without asking about the parents, because you now know that's part of that person's reality, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I remember when I was working in-house a few years ago as the director of development, and it was in the midst of COVID. And most of my conversations weren't even about the mission. It was these people who had come to our organization week in and week out to volunteer. And then all of a sudden they lost their sense of community. And all they were talking to was family members, and they were really lonely. And so just having those conversations with them wasn't even about money, but it was really about getting to know them and making sure that they feel seen and supported. And the philanthropy came afterwards. Like I didn't go back to my boss and report like, oh, I got a certain dollar amount, but it came eventually. And it was just like you said about having that compassion and empathy, making sure that person feels seen and heard and just have someone to talk to.
Yeah, and I think part of the problem is that there's this idea, this perception that donors, especially major donors, don't have the same hopes and needs and need for compassion and a conversation and all of that the rest of us do. And that's just, I don't know why that is. I don't know. People really, and I have to say, when we first found out we were going to have money, I did think, I don't want to become one of those people. But it's really, there's a lot of donors, many donors, probably the vast majority of them, who are really kind, good people, just like people that we would see anywhere. And I think to all of a sudden put these assumptions onto them that they're jerks or they're whatever, or they're nasty, or they're only giving for bad reasons, or that's just not fair. That's look at me looking at somebody else on the street and saying, okay, by my one quick look at you, I'm going to decide that you're this and this. And that's not fair and it's not true.
And I think that also comes with internal culture, right? It comes with the language that we use around fundraising. So can you talk a little bit more about how like the internal culture and how your organization views philanthropy, views fundraising as an indicator of how you're going to approach different donors?
Okay, so I think that there is definitely a language piece. So there's a language piece, but there's also a structural piece. And that's the idea that volunteers, and you had talked about volunteers working with you and needing community and all of that, but the idea that volunteers are in a separate box than the donors and the major donors are in a separate box than the smaller donors, and that you really only have time for the major donors and the rest of them is a drudgery, and not looking at them as people and volunteers who, I think one of the best stories I've heard about this is that a large number of Gen Z and millennial have now been shown to be volunteering at organizations, knowing that a lot of nonprofits are dysfunctional and people might not treat women and young people the correct way. So they're actually volunteering at organizations just to see how functional or dysfunctional your organization is and how kind the people there are. And this is, I'm guessing it's the majority of them. They want purpose in their life, but they don't want to be connected to an organization that doesn't fit their vision of the way things should be. But yet, the nonprofits, even as research comes out showing that, because I've seen this documented, we find that the nonprofits are still ignoring the volunteers. It's like almost if you're a volunteer, you have a badge, a sign on your forehead that says, not a donor. And that's just cutting off. So that is language and an approach that doesn't do anybody any good. And we might as well just close up shop if we're going to do that.
I think another thing that people also view as like up here or separate is the board of directors. And I know that they often work in silos and there's a disconnect between the staff on the ground and the board of directors. And I also think there is an opportunity, and it is being discussed, about building more inclusive and supportive board of directors. And obviously, we know this is crucial for any nonprofit. So when it comes to engaging board of directors or building your ideal board, what does that look like? And how can nonprofits ensure their boards are truly representative and effective?
So you hit on that directly. They need to be representative of the people that you serve and of your organization in general. So this idea of, well, we can only have board members who've been board members, who are friends of somebody who's friends of somebody, or those kinds of things. Actually, I have to say, I've been on a lot of boards, as I'm sure you have. I don't think board members want that. They don't. I think they want to have new life brought in. They want to, if I'm really into what you do and the community you serve, I'd like to see some of that community. And I have been on boards where the executive director has said, you don't get to interact with the staff. You don't get to interact with our constituents. That stays separate. You only get to interact with me, is what this particular executive director said. And I've had versions of that happen over and over again, that just, I'm going to keep you all siloed. And that's strange. I really believe, and I work with a lot of organizations, and using a matrix concept is very simple, but you put together a spreadsheet of the different categories that your people are in, everything from economic to, do you have experience working at nonprofits, or do you have kids, or whatever it is. And you can put all of those on a spreadsheet, maybe 20, 30 different attributes, and then put that into a matrix and show for each of your board members where you have a ton of the same thing and very little of something else. And most boards will find out that they have very few of the actual people who actually represent the constituency, even in a vague way. But the area where I think it's a little bit out of control is the aversion that most nonprofits have to bringing younger people on their boards. Because right now we know that there's over 1 million millennials and Gen Zs. Actually, the new research shows people 30 years of age or younger in the US who are millionaires. And yet, every time we see somebody who's 28 and is interested in being on a board, every organization I've ever been to says, oh, no, they don't have the money. And so one guy called me and said, oh, I know why you want young people on your board. And I said, that's great. Why do you think that is? And he said, so we can get at their father's money.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
yeah, it's unfortunate. Yeah. So I think we need to bringing new life into boards. You always want to bring new life into whatever it is that you're doing. You always want to energize the community, no matter what it is. And no matter what, it could be for-profit business or nonprofit, but to ignore it and to then be so not only cynical, but condescending to say, oh no, young people don't have money, when we know for a fact, we can look at the US business data that says these people have money, and yet we continue to ignore them. And my big concern here is that we're going to turn those people off for life by having a bad experience with them, treating them as if they're nothing, that they don't exist, that they're not worth the conversation. And then they're just never going to want to give again. And that's a real problem sector-wide.
Yeah, when you're talking about those assumptions, Julie Ordonez posted on LinkedIn yesterday talking about how we have to stop assuming your board won't give, stop assuming younger people don't have philanthropy. Like, we have this assumption problem in the nonprofits where we just assume donors, like you said before, like donors are snobby, or they don't want to engage with us, or they're not going to give more than they've already had. We just make these assumptions and then we run with it. And then we aren't able to make advancements in the way that we want because we're stuck in those assumptions of what we perceive people to be.
Well, and that's also what happens in wealth screens sometimes. I think wealth screening is really important and certainly part of the picture, but to make a decision based on a standard wealth screen where people are saying, what's the value of your home? That's just crazy. You don't know how much equity they have in the house. So just the value of the home alone is really doesn't tell us a whole heck of a lot. And there's plenty of people you can find in the news who have willed huge amounts of money to organizations. And it feels like when I talk to nonprofits that are getting bequests on a regular basis, which hopefully all of them are, the one thing that seems to be a common between all of them is usually about half of those donations, a third to a half, are coming from somebody that nobody knew. I don't know if you've ever experienced that, where people are like, who is this person? Do you know this person? They just sent us a few $100,000, or they just sent us $1 million. And you find out that there was a janitor at the local school who had a good experience with somebody 20 years ago. So with that kind of factual proof, we need to get past those assumptions, because it doesn't, in the same way, by saying somebody has a ton of money because they have an expensive house, and then you find out that what we've seen a lot in the last few years is people making huge grants and pledges to large institutions, and then you find out there's really no money there. And so it works both ways.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And in your book, The Essential Fundraiser's Handbook, what are some of the critical insights or tools you provide to help fundraisers incorporate these better donor inclusive experiences into their daily work?
Yeah, every chapter is about a different piece of the kind of fundraiser world, nonprofit world. So there's a chapter on donor advised funds, which people still don't seem to completely understand. And most fundraisers are not, and a lot of donors aren't clear on how incredibly easy it is to use a donor advised fund and why people actually use them. They're not a bad thing per se. And once you see how they can be used, it's terrific. So I have a whole chapter on why I have a donor advised fund, why people I know have donor advised funds, why I was on the board of one of them, why I created an alternative one, and why my kids have them and how they use it, all of those kinds of things. There's also a chapter on events and galas. How do you really know if your gala made money? And what do you do if you have a donor who loves the gala because they love getting dressed up, but you're losing money on it every year? What are you supposed to do? So there's a section on each, and the book is not meant to be read as a book per se. It's meant to be read as a resource when you're looking up something like, oh, I want to really know about donor advised funds because I'm meeting with someone who has a donor advised fund. So I want to basically become intelligent on that. I want to get smart. So you can do that. But then every chapter, it's fun to read even at the beginning. Every chapter at the end has a number of tips, and they're very specific, short-term, usually free things that you can do immediately. An easy one is do a survey and ask your donors how they would like to be referred to when I call them or send them emails or mail. Do you want it to the man, to the woman? Do you want it to first names? What's comfortable for you? Or another question is, how do you like to be thanked? And everybody knows how they want to be thanked, yet there's lots of people in the nonprofit sector who say, oh no, we know they want a handwritten thank you note. And it turns out that the research that I've seen is actually, they think that's nice, but it's much more important that they get a thank you fast, immediately, like some people say within 48 hours or less, as opposed to waiting a month for a thank you note. And maybe they could get both, but it's that assumption of, I know they have money, therefore I know what they want. And that's just not, you wouldn't want anyone saying that about you.
Well, and there's proven statistics about thanking people within the first 48, acknowledging them in the first 48 hours and then following up over the next 90 days. There's that proven statistic of giving that second gift.
So why do you think people don't do it? Most people don't. I don't understand.
Yeah, me neither. I know the number of times I was a director of development calling and saying, I'm just saying, they're like, I already gave. And I'm like, I'm just calling to say thank you. It was such like a profound thing. That's simply was what I was calling to do.
Yeah, I know somebody who did that, and I've done it as well as a board member. And I think every board member should be making those calls as well. But one time, a friend of mine was doing a survey and asking some of these questions and saying, I see you. And the response he got back was, well, I didn't know that you people cared. And I thought that was really telling, but people want to be seen, not just donors, everybody. That's just human nature, like you said earlier.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And you also stress the importance of data, statistics, and interviews in guiding nonprofits towards sustainable success. Can you discuss how these elements play a role in creating a more honest and effective fundraising strategy?
Yeah. Well, one of these issues that we talked about earlier was boards getting in the way. And I think people ask me all the time, how do we get our board or how do we get our senior management to understand that, to understand that change is necessary? And there's plenty of kind of entry level and mid-level fundraisers all over the world who can see that change needs to happen, but they can't make the change happen because they have people they report to who say, let's just do it the way we always did it. So to me, the only way to really make progress with that, other than just standing up and screaming, which usually doesn't work, is to really show them those statistics and numbers and say, this is proven. This is not me. This is not somebody else. Here's proven numbers. And one of the things I love to do is look at really monthly donors versus once a year donors, or look at long-term donors versus short-term donors, and really try and see how much money, look at it in 5 years. Don't look at it 1 year. Look at it in 5 years and see which one brought more money to the organization. And I think once they see that, some people, not all of them, but hopefully eventually most people will look at that and say, oh, okay, that's not something that was anecdotal. That's actual research. And we have great research in our field, thanks to the Lilly School and Stanford and a lot of other institutions. And I think we need to use that to open people's minds.
Yeah, I definitely agree. There's power in that. And as we are looking forward, what do you see as the most significant challenges and opportunities facing the nonprofit sector today? And how can fundraisers and their organizations be prepared to address these in the coming years?
That's a big question. So I think it is all about making this fundamental change between transactional and relationships. That if we continue the transactional, we're not going to get anywhere. It's not going to get better. It might get slightly better and then it'll get slightly worse. We are not going to make any fundamental change. If we do the relationship method, and this is really well clearly stated when you look at the research relative to monthly donors. There was a new report that came out with Neon One about 2 months ago that was fantastic, 2-3 months ago, that shows that a monthly donor who's giving to you every month, putting a credit card in front of you basically and not touching it for, in some cases, years, they found that an annual donor or a one-time donor, doesn't matter if it's an annual fund or whatever, that they'll give money and they'll stay with your organization about, I think it was 1.7 years. If you are a monthly donor, they're staying at organizations, right? So under 2 years, which kind of fits with the other numbers. But if they're a monthly donor, it doesn't matter how much they're giving. They can give $5 a month, they can give $100 a month, they can give $1,000 a month. The monthly donors stay 8 to 9 years. And that's a big deal. So we need to look at that and say, oh, maybe we need to think about monthly giving. Maybe we need to follow that lead, because this is research that has been, there were smaller surveys done over the last several years saying the same thing. But Neon One, their database that they used for the research was like 150,000 people, organizations. So it's real information. It's not somebody making it up. And that's a huge difference. It's not like it's a little better. It's dramatically better to have that continuing, ongoing relationship. So having said that, I would say well over 90% of nonprofits either don't have a monthly giving program or they don't promote it. And I think that's a big mistake.
Yeah. And I love those statistics that there's that longevity there. And if you do your job right, hopefully it's longer than 8 to 10 years. Hopefully it leads to a legacy gift.
Right. I think so. And they also did say that they are more likely to give a legacy gift. That was also part of the research. And they're also more likely to give a second gift the same year. So they'll give a monthly gift, and then they hear that you have some issue 5 months later, And they're much more likely to give a gift than a one-time donor each year who was asked to give a second gift will say, I already gave. But a monthly donor, they're actually much more likely to give that second gift. And that's contrary to, I think, what a lot of people think. And so I think we let the research speak for a lot of it and make sure we present that to people who have power.
Yeah, we'll definitely make sure to link to that resource in the show notes. Lisa, this has been such a wonderful conversation. Where can people find the work and your books?
Books are available anywhere books are sold, Amazon to the small bookstores, whatever. I even saw that Target had it the other day, which was exciting. But you can just go to lisagreer.com, lisagrer.com, and you can learn there how to get both of my books and also how to subscribe to my newsletter that comes out twice a month, as well as our weekly tips that come out every Tuesday. So I highly recommend you check it out.
Well, thank you so much, Lisa. Again, this has been such a joy for me, and I just appreciate this conversation.
Thanks so much, Haley. It was just lovely to be here, and thank you to your listeners.
If you have valued these stories or learned something from what you've heard, please share this podcast episode or follow me on LinkedIn. Thank you so much for your support, and together we can build a better community and world.